Aromie here. Welcome back to our life, Baxter DLC. We are here at the bar, so we can go now meet with Xavier. Bartender was definitely someone new, but that was for the best since you weren't sitting at the bar. Instead, he snagged a booth with enough room for a party of 3 and were passed an appropriate number of drink menus. It was still a bit early to start drinking, but you guessed right then that it wasn't going to stop Baxter. Only when the host was finished and gone did Baxter take out his phone. "I'll let them know we've arrived." "Okay." Even though it was your own doing, you're getting nervous. All you could do was wait and think about all the ways this could be a horrible mistake. Baxter grinned sweetly, sensing the unease, and put the phone away. His attention was set on you, even if the topic wasn't.
You know.
Xavier is a delightful person. That's nice. You had to imagine a person would be required to be particularly pleasant, thoughtful individual to build up even a teeniest friendship with someone as closed off as Baxter. One thing you could already give Xavier, regardless of whatever else, was that they saved your boyfriend from being entirely alone before you'd found him again. You're grateful for it. "Hi, Xavier." I love Xavier's fucking style. It's just so cute. Xavier strode through the door shortly after a set of waters were placed down around the table. They ditched the apron that day, which made perfect sense since you were meeting up casually outside of their place of employment. Though it suited them so well, it was a staple part of their look. If Xavier had worn it out, you bet strangers would have accepted it as entirely correct anyway. Your eyes met across the open space of the bar. Baxter said to welcome them. Xavier wasted no time linking up. It's like, god damn, I just love the pink. "Good evening." He held his hand straight out for a shake. Xavier went with it, giggling.
"Always a pleasure."
"Hi, Baxter," Michiko. "Thanks for finding the time to see me after all."
Yes.
"Of course, Xavier, of course." You and Baxter sat side by side. He rejoined you there while Xavier slid into the opposite bench. "It's fantastic to see you again." They shot you a grin and scooped up the third and final menu. "Are you ordering anything?" "I am. I want a martini. It suits the atmosphere of this place." "It is appropriate." Resting his arms in front of him, Baxter draped himself dramatically over the table. "And finally, I can have a real Bellini." I figured. Let's look over the alcoholic drink menu, you know? Well, what's on here? Alright. Nothing I actually drink. Usually I go for like the really sweet stuff, but I don't know what's sweet on here. Probably wine. Definitely not beer. Or vodka. Maybe a martini. Martinis are sweet. Rum cola I don't think will be sweet. Whiskey sour sounds not sweet. Bloody Mary is just like... I've never had it, but I've seen them before. It's just not my thing. I mean, maybe a citrus sunshine cocktail. Are cocktails sweet? Wait, am I mixing up between martinis and margaritas? Margaritas are sweet. Let's do this. The early hour wasn't going to stop you either. You were on a vacation for real at that point. Since everyone was decided, the order was placed as soon as the waiter came by. He jotted down the request, collected the menus, and promised to be back shortly. Then the second he was out of earshot, Xavier shot a pinning stare at the couple sitting snugly across from them.
"So?"
"Baxter?" You knew where this was going. It was easy to imagine the shock and confusion Xavier must have been stuck living in until now. You refer to yourself as Michiko's boyfriend. Is that a joke? The last time we met, you were vowing that the two of you would never see each other again after the wedding. Baxter threaded his fingers together while leaning forward. He grinned cordially. There was no way to spin this sudden leap in the relationship that wasn't abysmally embarrassing for him, and he didn't care. With as much audacity as someone who could ask a baker to make a wedding cake with 3 days' notice, your good friend gave an apologetic answer. My good friend.
Honestly.
Well, I guess he is my good friend and my boyfriend. It seems I am fairly overdramatic, man. That's the only joke in this. Quite obviously, Michiko and I will continue seeing one another. Hearing him say that so fearlessly to another person was such a thrill. Though fairly overdramatic, what an understatement. Incredible. It wasn't even the first time they were hearing it, but Xavier was stunned silent yet again by the news. This time, though, the conversation couldn't be ended with the tap of a screen.
"What's the dynamic here?"
"Well, I'm happy for the both of you, but what's happening with the theatrics to begin with?" They were nothing if not persistent when it came to getting the specifics. Decorators did have an eye for detail. You shared the funny story, you tried to explain the awkward turn of events, you admit the sad situation gone through. You continue listening to Baxter's recount things. I want to hear from him. Baxter squared his shoulders, looked Xavier straight in the eyes, and divulged your shared history. He didn't hesitate or leave anything out to save face. The unideal reality of the past was laid out in its entirety. Good. At least I know my man's gonna be honest. Swirling their longest strands of hair, Xavier found the whole of the story much easier to grasp than they had only heard the ending.
To be honest.
Honestly, I'm not surprised in the slightest. As pleasant as things were when you stopped by the bakery, I always assumed if you stopped having client-based reasons to visit, you never would have spoken to me again. Looks like I was right on that assessment. Baxter's gaze dropped. He couldn't help it. Developing closer ties could never make him ashamed, no matter how odd the circumstances. Doing the inverse, however, might always remain a source of guilt for him.
I apologize.
It's not your fault. I have no talent for maintaining relationships that aren't entirely unavoidable, and sometimes not even then. I get it. Trust is always a work in progress, right? I'd say we would have become actual friends eventually, but Michiko giving you a push can speed that right along. Baxter lifted his face at that, speaking softly. Xavier was a nice person. Yes, I think so too. Drinks arrived shortly. Your little group mutually took that as a closing to the interrogation of Baxter Ward and Michiko Melody. After serving the order, the waiter left once more, saying to call him if you need anything else. Xavier and Baxter put a pause on any future discussion to sample their stuff. By their delighted ums and hms over the flavor, it sounded like the bar was a hit with both, though Baxter would probably appreciate any alcohol over the mocktail he'd gotten the last time he'd been here. Yours was delicious too. The three of you stayed quiet until Xavier chimed in with the next major topic of this meetup, Jude and Scott Adams' wedding. How'd the day go? It went off without a hitch. They're a wonderful, stable couple.
Woohoo!
They whistled. The odds were beat. That was for certain. By all accounts, you should have been informing Xavier how the last-minute preparations ended in disaster. Yes, and your cake got rave reviews from the guests, of course. Of course.
Cute.
I can sleep easy knowing I made a cake for a crowd who enjoyed it, and for a couple who should actually be getting married. I'm happy for them. Some of these jobs, shivers ran through Xavier's body. I feel like I'm making a macabrelli beautiful feast to celebrate a horrible mistake. Baxter chuckled at his colleague, his fellow in creating matrimonial bliss, and his match in insight for when the happiest of someone's life is not quite so happy. While I tend to believe in every pair who comes through my office, it is difficult to avoid the occasional wallow in cynicism. The wedding industrial complex will do that to you. Or it would have if I hadn't already possessed a streak of pessimism when it came to relationships lasting. But we've gone down that track. Xavier's manicure lashes fluttered as they rested against the back of the booth. They sighed in relief. Relaxing time was over after 1 minute, and they tilted forward again, now assured their efforts weren't in vain. Xavier could indulge in juicier ponderings. Hey, what bakery made that groom's cake? I admit, I took a peek at what was under the cover when I dropped my own off. It was cute. Wow, that was designed by Michiko and Baxter Bakeries. Xavier actually jumped in their seat.
What?
They settled down and gingerly patted their coiffed hair, making sure it was still in place. Surprises after surprises. You're squishy under that stiff suit of yours, Baxter.
Come on.
As though that is actually a surprise. They giggled, the sound akin to the bell on Zake's front door. True, that part isn't. You and Michiko baking a cake is. It is. You might be surprised. Don't you recall it wasn't the first time we've been in a similar squeeze?
Oh.
Wait, you're right. Those mystery cupcakes. From that auspicious start, Baxter told more stories from the wedding. Eventually, it transitioned to Baxter sharing especially memorable moments from other jobs he'd worked on. Some highlighted real-life potential pitfalls you could work to avoid if you ever got married, while others were one-in-a-million debacles. The most unbelievable was the story of a particular orchard-set wedding. A ceremony had been prepared with flowers, a walkway, seating, and a bespoke wooden arch at the end. As a planner, he was doing a final survey, primed for the guests to arrive, when an out-of-control truck with a back end full of apples barreled straight through. Baxter stressed that the driver was fine when he managed to come to a stop, and the couple was still married, albeit in a much simpler arrangement, so no real harm was done. However, Baxter distinctly recalled the comedic surrealness of it. Seeing a completed ceremony, the fruit of weeks of work, and then having it flattened to the ground in the blink of an eye was something he never expected or hoped to experience. For all the misery of the moment, he did confess that tobacco made for a great mood setter going forward. He shared the memory with every couple he'd worked with since. to help put their own struggles into perspective. It warmed your heart seeing Baxter so at ease. None of the carefully maintained distance remained between him and Xavier, or him and you. There was no sadness or sense of loss when it came to time to part ways. After all, this didn't have to be final. You had the power to reach out again if you wanted. The bill was split and that got paid before saying goodbye to the baker. With a cheery waving grin, Xavier left for home. You liked them. Xavier was someone you could count among your friends. The music was good and drinks weren't done, so you and Baxter were in no rush to leave yourselves. Light conversation was made. Thank you for keeping me company all this time. Thank you for coming to see my mom, so I was happy to see them. It's been too long, even though it hasn't been long at all. Barely a whole month. He tapped a finger against his glass, watching you and smiling sweetly.
I get it.
I can understand why their presence would be missed. Your family members are lovely people. Baxter was so nice about your moms and big sis. That was something you deeply appreciated. Your family meant a lot to you. But you couldn't forget the offhanded way he noted his own parents and his list of people he'd lost contact with. Is it okay if I ask about your mom and dad? Oh. Okay. No? It's fine. Baxter's fingers, which were gingerly wrapped around a champagne glass, twitched. That is fine. He placed the cup down with a clink. You're my girlfriend after all. You're allowed to know details about my mysterious, opaque life. Oh, it's so great to hear that he's saying girlfriend. Baxter might have been able to form quips as glibly as ever, but you hadn't missed the dullness in his eyes. To start, I haven't spoken to my parents in a few years now. That's what I meant when I included them in the list of relationships I haven't maintained. So they weren't talking at all. He frowned. Even if making new ties seemed impossible to him, what would make Baxter cut off the family he'd always known? Those questions stayed within the confines of your head. This wasn't the time to interrupt. You felt your sharp reaction and gave a tight smile. Don't worry, it isn't a painful topic for me, exactly. Mostly I find it disappointing, frustrating, certainly awkward. Shifting in his seat, Baxter leaned on his elbow and angled his body towards you. Before I caused too much concern, they've never done anything to intentionally hurt me. My parents have always cared for my well-being. And I can't deny how much they have done for me. All the opportunities and advantages I had because they provided them. They gave me the best they knew how, and Baxter cut himself off, raising one hand and using the other to pinch the brow of his nose. He was thoroughly unimpressed with his own ramblings. This is not as nuanced as I might be making it sound. What a novelty it would be if I could speak favorably of my own family. Can you imagine? That's not the case, however. Dark brown eyes stared into yours, as serious and unmovable as they were whenever he demanded the listener to grasp the depth of the chasm between him and them. What I am trying to say is that my parents are, on the whole, good to me, and they do love me as their child whom they raised for nearly 2 decades. Just as I still feel compelled to give them credit for the minimum, I'm certain they're telling their acquaintances endless excuses for why I'm so distant and unagreeable with them. They haven't given up on me in their own way. But all that does not make them good people. I can assure you that because they are not good people, I'm merely a rare exception to the unpleasantness. My parents are selfish, they're sheltered, even as adults. For example, you, Michiko Melody, are, well, my absolute ideal. I'm in love with you. The warmth in Baxter's voice when he described you burned into a bitter ash, but I doubt they could understand.
I swear.
Based on quite a colorful variety of factors. Baxter suddenly raised his voice and arms, almost knocking over his own beloved Bellini. Then their nonsense priorities and concerns are what my parents expected from me. Baxter quieted down again, quick. He was in public, and you weren't the person he wanted to be shouting at anyway. After straightening out his jacket, Baxter crossed his leg under the table.
How wonderful.
How ironic that I can finally see the silver lining of my lifelong struggles thanks to them. If I never realized how poor my connections were, or if I never cared that my relationships were nothing more than associations based on conveniences, maybe I'd have been who they wanted. Regardless, I'm not their ideal son. They're not my preferred company either, and I don't expect you to ever meet my family. That's honestly for the better. You nodded slowly, taking his word on it. Baxter had barely mentioned his parents 5 years ago when they were closer. Still, it wasn't nothing. He'd given small crumbs of insight into the dynamic when you knew him before. And it had bothered you ever since. When you were teens, Baxter laughed off every concerning line about his family, knowing how the story ended changed the way you saw those early chapters. Do you remember when we talked about how we got along with our families before? You'd taken him by surprise this time, he raised a brow. Back when we went to that hotel, you asked about my family and asked about yours. You said something about how they were problems. There were problems. And they'd really be problems if your parents weren't your parents. Yes, I think I did say something along those lines. It was so silly back then. Imagining myself as not their son and not someone they loved seemed meaningless at the time. They did love me and that's what mattered. Of course, it's not always enough, is it? If I wasn't theirs, either through birth or adoption, if I was someone else's son, they would hate me. I know I'm foolish on many accounts. It took me a long time to realize that them being hypercritical shouldn't reassure me the way it did. Baxter Ward could have as many shortcomings or problems as he did, and it'd be fine because it was different in that case. There were reasons, can't you see? But they couldn't see that the other people deserved the same kind of understanding, and that some things weren't problems in the first place. Mr. and Miss Ward were not people you need to build up a rapport with. That was more than certain. Alright. Well, we'll never see them, don't worry. If you don't want to see them, we don't see them. Because clearly, you've already cut them off in your life. So it's whatever. Because, not most. I feel like this happens a lot in people's, either someone they're in love with or like friends rise. Like I know for my particular situation, my parents are not together. So, Tyler doesn't really have to associate with them too much. He only has to say hi and bye whenever I do see them in Florida, but he doesn't have to build a close bond because, I personally don't have that much of a close bond with my parents either. I just feel like it's something within my family though, where we care for each other, but we don't verbally state it. Like I know my parents love me, but sometimes I wish I could hear that. I'm just saying. But it's fine. My brother and I grew up fine. We both know the lack of love from my parents. So my brother and I would always make sure to show that affection to each other. Be like, hey, I love you. How you doing? What's going on? Like we would keep up with each other. If I didn't have a brother though, I feel like I would be not me. I feel like I wouldn't be as emotional. I feel like I would be like Baxter. And nothing wrong with Baxter, but I prefer who I am now. So anyway, this is where we're going to end today's episode off. I really thought this was going to end up soon, but I guess not. I think maybe there's a little bit more to go, but I am going to end it for today's pre-recording because I am hungry. Aria is also needing the bathroom, and I am almost done with my laundry. So thank you guys for watching. Stay beautiful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.